Hello, good morning, welcome. Hope you're keeping safe, hope you're keeping sane. Before I get on to the topic of today's videos, I want to clear up two things. Firstly, yes, I'm aware of what a state my hair looks. Look at the state of that, blimey. I personally blame Boris. He opened the pubs at exactly the same time as the hairdressers. Had he given the hairdressers and barbers a week's head start, something like that, then maybe people with questionable priorities such as myself might end up looking quite like him. Secondly, there was a little bit of misunderstanding, I think, about my last video where I spoke about gambling advice, and I did talk about people being preachy and people being holier than thou and talking from their high horse about giving gambling and recovery advice. The point of the video really was that the people that I considered to be preaching at me, the people I considered to be the holier than thou brigade, the my way or the highway kind of lot, actually turned out to be the ones I should have been listening to. That was kind of the message of the video, if the video can actually have a message. Yeah, I can see that was maybe misunderstood by a couple of people. So I wasn't calling people out for being preachy. I was saying that I should have listened to those that initially I didn't really want to listen to because they weren't saying exactly what I wanted to hear, were they? So what I want to talk about today was actually something brought up by someone in the comment section under one of my videos and asked me about recovery fatigue. And just to sort of elaborate, I guess, on what that means. After a certain period in recovery, after a certain period of abstinence, and it's certainly something that I experienced in both my long stints, including the current one of abstinence, a certain level of boredom and apathy, I'd say is probably the best word. Apathy sort of sets in to your recovery, and it is actually a challenge, and it does actually threaten the success of your recovery. So as always, all I can do is ramble my way through my own lived experience and tell you exactly how I felt and exactly kind of how I've overcome it, if that is indeed something I have overcome, and I'm not 100% sure it is, in all honesty. When I started my recovery, and as I said, this is my second real stint at recovery. There were periods before this where I had told myself I was going to stop gambling, but they were generally half-assed efforts, if I'm honest, short-lived, didn't take the right steps and failed. But in this period of recovery that I'm going to talk about, initially there is an awful lot of focus on the recovery itself. I was obviously motivated to make these changes in my life. I was motivated to make improvements in my life. And the early stages of recovery were kind of taken up by the active parts of early stage recovery, which include the measures you have to take to, as much as is possible, ensure the success of your recovery. So that's going out and self-excluding and putting the blocks in place and talking to people and going to counselling and doing all of these great things. Also, apart from the sort of the active side of it, there's a very sort of psychologically passive side of it, which is maintaining focus. In the early stages of recovery, I found it quite mentally draining because you are constantly aware of getting through the day without gambling. You're aware of any situations that might potentially put you at risk, and you are aware of avoiding those situations wherever possible. You also have recovery on your mind a lot, and you also have gambling on your mind an awful lot because it's still very fresh, and the two are psychologically butting heads. And like I say, it can be quite mentally tiring, but in the early stages of recovery, at the very least, this sort of psychological turmoil, if you can call it that, does help you maintain an element of focus, because it's there, it's right there at the forefront of your mind, which is in some ways, I suppose, counterproductive, because it means that you're thinking about gambling, you're thinking about the process of gambling and the process of not gambling, when realistically, in order to give you recovery the best possible chance, ideally you'd be thinking of anything but that's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. And we do have to remain conscious and remain very aware and remain very guarded against the risks of urges and lapses and all the rest of it. Over time, and the length of time it takes will be different for everyone. Over time, though, this does start to subside. I think common consensus is either sort of 30 or 60 days to break a cycle of addictive behaviour. This doesn't mean this cures your addiction in 60 or 30 days. It just means that you break the cycle of behaviour. So you stop just, well, exactly as it sounds really, you stop doing the same things day after day after day. And whether it be after that 30 days, whether it be after that 60 days or whenever, you will start to see a subsidence in urges. Your urges will become less frequent. They will go from being basically constant to infrequent, and often they will be less severe. But don't get complacent, of course, because they will always be there, and it doesn't take a huge urge to unfortunately sort of result in a lapse. So you do still have to be on your guard. But over time, yes, it does wear off, and not gambling becomes more of what you are and more your cycle of behaviour than gambling was. And you become sort of you are then passively recovering rather than actually actively having to focus on it. And this is where recovery fatigue can set in, because it's once you stop thinking about gambling and you go about living a more normal life, that you realise there are great swathes of time where you'd normally be gambling that you now have nothing to fill, because you've committed so much of your life to gambling. You've probably not had the opportunity to organically develop other hobbies and interests and stuff. So you find that boredom will set in. You'll also find that boredom sets in the way I spoke about in one of my previous videos, because you've been gambling, you're used to such a heightened sort of peaks and troughs in terms of brain chemicals, that sort of less hard-hitting sort of activities, less dopamine-stimulating activities seem boring. So whilst you may try and fill these big gaps of time with something else, a hobby, or it's hard to actively develop a hobby. It's kind of something that happens organically normally. But whatever you try and fill that time with will probably not hold your interest as well as it would in a normal non-recovering person, because your brain is used to heightened levels of dopamine, and something that sort of reading or crochet may not quite scratch. So you have that problem. The other problem that you'll find with recovery fatigue is the maybe it wasn't so bad mentality starts to set in. And that is exactly as it sounds. That gambling hangover will have long faded. That memory of that big loss, or whatever it was, the big argument with your partner, big falling out with your family, whatever it was that sparked that straw that broke the camel's back moment, where you went, right, that's enough. I'm actually going to do this now. I want to do this. And we've always talked about want to abstain and want to recover. Whatever triggered you into that state where you were driven to actively go out and do something to change your life and to get yourself into recovery, that's faded. And the motivation then to recover has faded, and the pain of losses and the pain of the damage that you've caused may have faded. So you'll think, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I just let it get out of hand. Maybe it's safe to go and just gamble recreationally, like the normal people do. I have been in that situation, and I have suffered from that, and I have experimented with it, and I can tell you it was an abject failure. And this is why this is my second period of recovery. So there's that, and as well, I think one of the driving reasons that we get into recovery in the first place is because we want to change our lives for the better. Now, that can be financial, because we've built up debts, or we're struggling to pay things, or we've got letters coming through the door every day. It could be because we've lost friendships, we've ruined relationships, we've broken down ties with family because of our gambling, maybe because we've been sort of dishonest off the back of our addiction. And we want to get these things fixed, and these things aren't always a quick fix. So you'll find yourself in this position where you've not been gambling. The motivation to quit has somewhat subsided, but all the things that you wanted to fix and the reasons that drove you to get into recovery in the first place may not be fixed. I know when I started my, recovery journey, that my finances were in a horrendous state, and it wasn't something that I could fix in a few months. So when I actually was in recovery, I was addressing these problems, and I was starting to make arrangements with creditors and pay things back and do this, that and the other. So not only was I no better off financially, because I still didn't have any money, it was all going out, but I was actually now very much more aware of my financial problems. So if anything, it kind of felt worse, because it all come to the forefront because I'd actually addressed it. And relationships that you lose through gambling, well, they don't necessarily come back. That's the hard truth of it. And even broken relationships with family can take a long, long time to mend. So you find yourself, and trust me, I'm not saying this from a negative perspective, and we'll come on to that, but you'll find yourself in this weird sort of no man's land where you're not that active in your recovery because you put all the blocks and stuff in place. You're feeling a little bit kind of meh about it because you haven't seen the improvements that you want to see, and you can't find the same buzz from that you used to get from gambling through other hobbies and interests, because they literally don't offer that. And then there's very little, I'll be honest, apart from sort of drugs, alcohol, pornography, all the rest of it, that offers that instant gratification, that instant dopamine hit. And there's not a lot that can replace gambling like for like in those terms. So yeah, you get this gambling fatigue. But what you have to do at this point is sort of focus on, try and recall the reasons you did this in the first place. Look to find how you've made progress, things you may have achieved. It was hard for me, and like I say, this is why I don't think I've necessarily got a solution to it, except to tell you that from my own experience, you come out the other side of that, and it's when you come out the other side of that, be that after 30 days, 60 days, 6 months, a year, whatever, that you do actually start to see improvements. I, for once, have money in my bank. I don't have phone calls and letters every day from people trying to collect money from me. I am now taking pleasure in more simple things. I was away with my wife at the weekend, and we just did a lot of walking along cliffs and beaches and stuff, and it's something I never would have had the patience for, but it's something that I could actually enjoy. So the one thing I would say is, if you are going through this period of recovery fatigue where you're either feeling that you're not achieving what you wanted to achieve, you're thinking that actually it can't have been that bad after all, or worse still, you're thinking, well, maybe I'm cured now, maybe the addiction is fixed, then I would suggest that whilst that in itself feels like a lull, it is actually the bottom of the dip, and things will start to improve from there on in. And that's only from my experience, of course. The problem with recovery, unlike a lot of other things we aim to do in our lives, is it's an end in itself. It's not a means to an end. Most goals we set ourselves in life, get married, have children, start a company, I don't know, run a marathon, whatever, have a finite goal. There's a thing that you're aiming for. Ultimately, what we're aiming for in recovery is to die having not gambled again, which is quite a morbid and depressing thing to aim for. Which is what obviously gives life to the one day at a time mantra. But at the risk of being cliched, recovery isn't a destination, it is a journey. But it's a journey that allows you to take a much more active role in your own life. And from my experience, start to gain pleasure in normal things and start to develop normal relationships and just live a life that has less of a burden, be that either the burden of gambling itself or the burdens that we create for ourselves through this addiction. So it's been a bit of a rambly video, and I'm sorry I don't have an exact answer, but all I would say is if you are experiencing recovery fatigue, then keep going, because you might find this is the pivotal point at which things actually start getting notably better. But yeah, take care of yourselves. I hope that was interesting. Like I say, not a great motivational one, but certainly one to tell you that you're not alone. But do stick with it, because the best I'm sure is very much yet to come. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Stay sane. See you soon.